What are you waiting for?
So the official trailer for The Mandalorian and Grogu has dropped, and well...
I got a bad feeling about this.
The Mandalorian and Grogu comes at a time when Star Wars as a brand is perhaps at its most vulnerable state that it's ever been in. Interest has been declining over the past decade among the general public, due to the average quality of everything coming out being below the standard that people have hoped for. The sequel trilogy was an absolute disaster, which rubbed myself and millions of others the wrong way. It felt like a slap in the face, a betrayal to all the fans that fell in love with the franchise that George Lucas created. The sequel trilogy brought to light the fact that this was no longer the Star Wars that we once knew, the creative masterpiece of one of the most talented auteur filmmakers of a generation. No, this was now corporate Star Wars, Disney Star Wars, which was no longer viewed as the biggest brand in pop culture, but rather as just another one of their IPs and their giant web that they have ownership of. After the sequel trilogy came to the horrendous conclusion with The Rise of Skywalker, we entered what has now been the over 6-year era of Star Wars on Disney+. Many shows have come and gone, and despite a few exceptions, it has just been shitter after shitter after shitter. The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka, The Acolyte were all terrible or at best below average. But despite all of that, there was one show that managed to slip its way through the cracks, becoming not only a massive critical and cultural success, but also had an initial warm reception from the fans, that being The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian was the show that launched Disney Plus, with its first season debuting in late 2019. Many at the time wondered if Star Wars would work in a live-action show setting. Many wondered if there would be even enough people interested in shows like this. Or would it just be forgettable projects that inevitably fall into the background of the films? But to the surprise of everybody, as well as Lucasfilm, The Mandalorian Season 1 became an absolute cultural phenomenon. Everybody and their mama was talking about it. The toy and merchandise manufacturers couldn't make products fast enough. It was the thing that you had to see, or you just weren't cool. Sure, the narrative was pretty simple and thin, lacking much depth to it. The characters were pretty surface level, but The Mandalorian was able to capture that vague sense of the Star Wars feeling that people were yearning for the sequel trilogy to give them, which it failed to do. Combine that with the fact that Mando Season 1 was releasing episodes simultaneously with The Rise of Skywalker's release, a Star Wars film, mind you, that the majority of the fanbase dislikes, gave reassurance to people that maybe this was the direction that Star Wars should head in going forward. And you know, maybe Disney is the right captain to steer the ship. Maybe they're onto something here. Skip forward a year to the end of 2020, and Lucasfilm continued the hype wave with the release of Season 2. Everybody was locked in their homes because of COVID, so there was really not a whole lot to do other than just sit around and watch movies and TV in your free time, which definitely lended itself well to Mando Season 2 because it ended up being just as big of a cultural success as Season 1. Season 2, however, I think is where a lot of people, including myself, started seeing some issues. The overall narrative quality had dipped slightly from Season 1, which already was pretty average, as well as in hindsight, Season 2 was just too cameo heavy for my liking, and seemed more focused on selling the audience on the prospect of other shows in the future, rather than being a self-contained story. Despite that though, most people were satisfied with the ending of it all. The overarching story of the first 2 seasons had been completed. Din Djarin finally managed to get Grogu in the hands of Luke Skywalker, where he could go off and hone his abilities in the Force that had been teased thus far. The AI Luke face was a little creepy, but the emotional payoff of that scene felt well earned. But with Season 2 ending on that natural stepping off point for the narrative, Lucasfilm had a decision to make. Logically, you could have just ended the story there, and I think people would have been content with it. Or, now that the 2-season story arc was done, you could build from there and go off in a different direction. But this is where everything started to fall off a cliff. Mandalorian Season 3 was delayed heavily due to a lot of behind-the-scenes issues and complications, so the following year in 2021, instead of The Mandalorian Season 3, was the release of The Book of Boba Fett. The Book of Boba Fett was an unbelievable display of artistic incompetence, but surprisingly, the biggest takeaway from that show wasn't actually anything to do with Boba Fett. It was the fact that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau decided to sideline Boba Fett in his own show and dedicate 2 episodes of an already only 7-episode season to following the next chapters in the Mandalorian and Grogu story. A very odd decision indeed, which had a lot of fans confused. It essentially acted as a Mandalorian Season 2 2.5 in a show that wasn't supposed to be about Mando. But the worst part of it all, Dave and John made the abysmal decision that these episodes would essentially go back on everything that was accomplished in the first 2 seasons. All that time we spent watching Mando and Grogu go to hell and back, making their way all over the galaxy, for them to finally complete the mission in the end, but then for the writers to immediately go back on it, was just a big punch in the face to anybody that actually cares about good storytelling. And we know why they did this, of course. The Mandalorian show merch, in particular the Baby Yoda merch, was flying off the shelves, and Disney wasn't just about to let that go so easily. Because who cares about artistic merit, you know, the entire purpose of your company, when you can squeeze out a couple more bucks of merchandise sales. And this is what I think truly marked the beginning of the end for The Mandalorian and Grogu as a viable moneymaker going forward. That summer was the release of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which once again was another Star Wars project that divided the fans. For many people, this was the last straw. It took one of the most beloved characters in the franchise and essentially turned him into a loser that forgot how to use the Force, despite him currently being on the most important mission in the galaxy. Some of the characters were obnoxiously terrible, some of the writing decisions really dampen and hurt A New Hope, and most people just threw in the towel on Star Wars after this. If the sequel trilogy acted as the fool me once, then Obi-Wan Kenobi was the fool me twice, and people just weren't gonna buy in anymore. Skip forward and Andor Season 1 came out that fall, and while that show was excellent due to it having actual quality artists making it, there was just so much bad faith built up by this point, combined with the fact that it being centered around a more niche character probably didn't help its cause. It wasn't able to get the buzz around it that it deserved. And when The Mandalorian Season 3 finally came out the next spring in 2023, about 2.5 years after Season 2, it just wasn't the same. By the time Season 3 of Mando came around, people were just fed up with the bullshit. Quite frankly, Disney waited too long. The hype built around The Mandalorian had died off a decent amount by this point, since there was such a large time gap between Seasons 2 and 3. Combine that with 2 shitty live-action shows that released before Season 3 of Mando, led to a lot of people checking out of Star Wars completely around that time. The 3rd season of The Mandalorian had an uphill battle from the start, and when it was released, it was clearly not up to the task. Everything that made The Mandalorian as a show and a character somewhat cool in the beginning, by Season 3 it had completely lost it. Din Djarin, the once rogue bounty hunter with few words and cool one-liners, was now relegated to this much more passive version of the character, which felt sidelined in favor of Bo-Katan despite this being his show. Baby Yoda, the cute creature that got people hooked in the beginning, but actually served a narrative purpose, was now there solely just to bum around as Mando's sidekick. Season 3 was riddled with dumb filler that didn't progress the story or meaningfully develop the characters in any way. This tension surrounding the Darksaber at the end of Season 2 between Bo-Katan and Mando was resolved in Season 3 by Mando just handing it over like a good little boy, despite that completely going against how the Darksaber as an object was always characterized, that being a weapon that must be won in combat. And then, only then, can the wielder be the true leader of Mandalore. And that's just to name a handful of things wrong with Season 3. As quickly as The Mandalorian rose to cultural prominence, it fell just as quickly, and we've pretty much been in the same status ever since. Skip forward to the present day, and I think it's safe to say that outside of Andor and the positive fan reception to Clone Wars Season 7, Star Wars has just been a massive flop for Disney on Disney+. And they know this. This is why we're starting to see the slow migration of Star Wars returning to the primarily theatrical IP, with The Mandalorian and Grogu releasing this year, Starfighter releasing next year, as well as the rumored Dave Filoni Star Wars film that would be sometime after that. And while I am excited for Star Wars to be back in the theaters, after taking into account that brief stroll down recent memory lane that I just summarized, it's hard not to look at The Mandalorian and Grogu coming out in a couple of months and not be very cautiously pessimistic. It is going to be about 6.5 years by the time Mando and Grogu releases that the last Star Wars film was in theaters, which was The Rise of Skywalker. That's the 3rd largest gap between Star Wars films in the franchise's history. So you'd think that for Star Wars' return to the big screen, they'd want to come back with a bang. Something fresh and new that would really serve as an announcement to the world, Star Wars is back, baby. But instead of being bold to kick off this new era for the company, they instead chose to play it as safe as possible. At least that's what they think. If I'm being honest, I don't think this is a safe play at all. I think they're vastly overestimating how much the general public still cares about these characters. I think they're vastly overestimating how much goodwill they still have left with the fandom. And I think they're vastly overestimating the current power of slapping a Star Wars logo on a poster, and that meaning it will automatically print money. The only kind of wild card you could say is, since it has been a long time since Star Wars has been in theaters, will there be that curiosity factor that brings people in just to see the thing that's been gone from theaters for over half a decade? It's hard to say. Ultimately, time will tell. If I'm a betting man though, sadly, I think this is probably going to bomb at the box office. I hate to say that, because I'd much rather Star Wars do financially well, be a well-written franchise, but that's just not reality at the moment. And my trepidation for this film's doom isn't just due to inconsistent quality with this show in the past. There's also the factor that the marketing for this film so far has been terrible, which neatly brings me along to the trailers. So the teaser trailer dropped about 4 months back, and the marketing campaign kicked off with an absolute dud. Link is in the description if you want to hear my thoughts on that one. But anyways, it was easily one of the worst Star Wars film trailers of all time. A lot of the shots were pretty uninteresting, as in not shots you'd expect to see in a trailer, because they were pretty stale. There wasn't a whole lot to grab onto, nothing really that jumped out at you that made you excited. The action shots weren't the best. Like, I don't know why they thought a 15-second sequence of an AT-AT slowly falling was a good climax to the trailer, but alas, I guess they did. But most importantly, it didn't really give out any clues as to what this film was even gonna be about. I know because I'm constantly paying attention to the leaks and everything going on behind the scenes, but the general public doesn't know that. This trailer didn't do a good job of getting the logline of the film across to the audience, which is the sole purpose of a trailer, to get people interested in the story of your film so that they go and watch it. So, it was a bad start to say the least. But then things somehow got worse with this recent Super Bowl ad catastrophe. Now, it was rumored shortly before the Super Bowl that one of the trailers being released during the game would be for The Mandalorian and Grogu, and I think this was pretty expected. But still, I'm sitting there before the game, getting in the mindset, locking in, you could say, to watch this trailer. But instead of a normal trailer or TV spot, instead we got a 30-second ad that had nothing to do with the actual movie, and instead was a Star Wars spoof of a Budweiser commercial. What the It's not even that I think that this trailer is that objectively bad. It's not that I don't get the joke. Yes, we the audience get the joke. We're not dumb. It's the fact that, wow, this feels poorly timed. If this was, say, 10 years ago, and the Star Wars brand was in a much better place, then sure, maybe you could throw this out there and all would be fine. Everybody would have a laugh and they'd move on with their day. But we're not in that better place. We're in the exact opposite. I'm gonna be frank with you people of Lucasfilm on the off chance that any of you are watching, and I say this from a place of love. You need to understand that Star Wars is in the gutter. There is so much goodwill you have to try to earn back among the fans. So much brand damage that you have to start trying to undo. You need to sell people on this film hard. Show us the people why this is something we can't miss. Show us why we should give Star Wars another chance. But no, instead we're out here dropping trailers of Baby Yoda spoofing beer. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, or who cleared this to get made, but that person deserves to be fired immediately. The reception to this ad among the fanbase was very poor overall, and I think Lucasfilm clearly got the message and felt like they needed to do some type of damage control, so just a little over a week later, they released the actual trailer. I get the sense that this trailer was released earlier than Lucasfilm wanted to, but they had to do something to cool the waters, and looking at this official trailer, I think it's clear that Lucasfilm knew they needed to step it up with this one. As a trailer, the full trailer is certainly better than the teaser. The action shots are a lot more exciting, there's more things shown that jump out at you which can actually warrant discussion, and there are some subtle hints as to what the story will entail. But do I think this trailer does enough to sell this film to the public? No. No, I don't. Now, I actually don't mind the premise of what this film seems to be. Mando going on a variety of missions throughout the galaxy on behalf of the New Republic, taking out a number of threats on their hit lists that are still lurking around. That's similar to what a lot of people were hoping the show would be from the very beginning. Mando going on a bunch of random bounty hunter type missions across the galaxy. But the question I can't help but ask myself is this really going to feel like a cinematic experience? Does it need to be in theaters? Or is it just going to feel like the writers took what would have been season 4, mushed them together, and gave it a slightly higher production budget. Kind of a similar vibe to the Clone Wars movie back in 2008, which we know was a story arc from the first season of that show, which was mushed together to be a movie. And if that's the case, this film could very much turn out to be a big mess, trying to take too many ideas and plots and cram them all into one 2-hour block. Besides that though, the other big thing that I'm worried about is it still isn't clear who exactly is supposed to be the main antagonist of this film. Is it going to be the Empire and all these leftover warlords? Is it going to be these Hutts that are left over from the Book of Boba Fett? Is it going to be Embo, who was lifted from Clone Wars and inserted here, likely just to evoke some nostalgia for Clone Wars fans? None of these are good options in my estimation to be the main villain of the film. All of these Imperial Muppets have no established character, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just means you gotta start from scratch, which wouldn't be a problem for a very talented creative, but the people working on this film aren't talented creatives, they are artistic hacks. These Hutts I find completely unthreatening and uninteresting. The Book of Boba Fett had a whole show to develop them, but instead they just show up a couple of times on a big bed, made one failed assassination attempt, and then cowered off into the sunset. And then Embo, while he certainly got aura, was much more of a cameo type of bounty hunter in Clone Wars that didn't really have much of an established character to him. Unless they can do a lot of work to develop him, he's not a great option either. And say they try to include all of these figures throughout the film to a significant degree, I know they're not going to get enough time for each of them to be developed properly into compelling villains. And I think looking back on it, you're very much going to be able to tell, okay, this should have been an episode, this should have been an episode, and this should have been an episode. I hope that's not the case, but I have a strong feeling that's what it's going to end up being. But perhaps the biggest thing that's working against this movie, and it really is the elephant in the room, but it still should be pointed out anyway, and that's that I just don't think people really care about seeing the next chapters in these characters' stories. Season 3 killed the show. What was the satisfying ending of Season 2 was just completely undone by the Book of Mando episodes and Mando Season 3. And you can't just undo that or act like it never happened. People are checked out now. It's over. And Lucasfilm just doesn't seem to grasp that. That's the thing about the competition in movie media. Once you hook somebody in, if you lose them, it's gonna be harder to get them back because they've probably just moved on to the next thing. And that's The Mandalorian in a nutshell. They got people to bite on the hook, started reeling them in, but then the hook broke. And even if you reel in the line, put on another hook, and cast the line back into the water, you probably can't get the fish now, because it's already swam away. All in all though, as I take a look at the calendar, seeing that we're about 3 months away from the film's debut, the overwhelming sense that comes over me at this current moment in time is that I've got a bad feeling about this.
I got a bad feeling about this.
There's just something in the air. I know you can sense it too, and it's not good. Whether it's the extremely poor viewership numbers for the trailers, whether it's the fact that nobody seems to be talking about this movie, nobody seems to be hyped for this movie, whether I think it's the fact that The Mandalorian has lost its once powerful cultural relevance, and whether it's the fact that I think Disney Star Wars has no juice left in the tank, all goes to say that if I'm a betting man, I think we're gearing up for an absolute cinematic abomination. But all I can do now is just wait. Wait for that fateful day on May the 22nd, and all will be revealed. Either all my concerns will have been proven to be foolish, or my instincts will have been proven exactly correct. I'm hoping it'll be the first one, but it'll probably be the latter.
Hey, never touch the buttons.
But with all that said, that's just about going to wrap up my brief thoughts for today. If you've made it this far and you've enjoyed the video, then please do me a favor by leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot and the support would be greatly appreciated. Also, before you go, make sure to take to the comments below and let me know some of your guys' thoughts thus far about the trailer, and just general thoughts going into the film. Whether it be optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere in between, as always, I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I will see you guys in the next one.